with respect to the Office of Climate Change itself and the office's capacity, as indicated in the opening statement, when the office was first established, it was focused mainly on supporting preparation and implementation of the LCDS. Over the years, and we know on the international scene that the whole issue of climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation, and countries taking action to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, and Guyana also being a party to the UNFCCC. It requires action beyond what Guyana is required to fulfill through the bilateral arrangement with the Norwegian government. And so we are now constrained in itself that the office needs additional technical staff to respond and also position Guyana to benefit from the international support available to countries, developing countries, to address their climate change challenges. What do I mean in this regard? If we're talking about reducing our emissions, and not just from the forest sector, we also need to look across all other sectors what is required, the appropriate technology. We also need to have technical officers in new and emerging sectors and fields. And Guyana also needs to have technical officers, particularly to leverage international climate finances available to the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, and we also have the Clean Development Mechanism through which technology is made available to countries such as Guyana. And so currently the office requires additional technical staff, and we are in discussions to see how best over the next 2-3 years we will be better positioned to satisfactorily as a country continue to be a leading force when it comes to climate change. Additionally, we are working with the agencies such as the GEA. We're also working with the Ministry of Agriculture. And as you noted earlier, it is so that we can address and mainstream, what do I mean by mainstream? But take the necessary action for climate change adaptation across all sectors, and for us to start including climate change solutions in our planning. So it should not just be the Office of Climate Change dealing with such matters, but across all government agencies, ministries, and departments. And for us to be successful in this regard, we need to reconsider how we go about this in terms of its implementation. Traditionally, government and also people expect that government to take action alone, but it's a collective. So we require action not just at the national level, but we also need to include actions in our regional plans, regional offices, and to involve all stakeholders. In the past, private sector was not necessarily an integral aspect of the actions taken. But now, because when you talk about green technology, when you talk about energy efficiency and alternative energy, it also requires private sector involvement. And so we need to have the necessary mechanism that will ensure that we have all decision makers, actors, and stakeholders involved in the decision making from the inception, because it will require both government action, private sector action, civil society action. And under the new Paris Agreement, which Guyana has signed on to, an important element is that as we pursue actions to address our climate change challenges and increase the country's resilience, we also need to look at the vulnerable and sections of society that are not usually involved. And this involves youth, women, and also what they call vulnerable group. We can define that to be whatever the particular situation is in the country. But of importance is we must involve all sections of society, and it is underpinned by whatever action we take must contribute towards our sustainable development goals. Now, how do we then include the sections of society that have not necessarily been included in the past? And we also need to position the next generation, not when the future comes, but we need to start working with them now. And so we require and will be working to ensure within the structure of the OCC, whatever that is defined to be over the next 6 months to a year, that we work with the educational institutions in Guyana, that is University of Guyana, also working with NSERD, so that we have climate change education and awareness starting from secondary school, primary schools, all the way up to the University of Guyana, and also working closely with my colleague here, Dr. Suresh Narayan at IAST, when we talk about technology transfer, the Faculty of Technology, even within the Department of Forestry at the Ministry at the University of Guyana. And so we have to take a different look. Most times when we talk about climate change and climate change solutions in Guyana, I believe over the years it was synonymous with the LCDS and the Norway Agreement. But many of you are aware, those who have been working in this field for many years, that it goes beyond just the bilateral. Guyana also has to fulfill its international obligations. And besides that, the country needs to take ownership. And I'm glad to see that the Minister of Finance is here, because one of the things that is also required, and government demonstrating its commitment by including climate change solutions and action in its own national budget. So it's comprehensive and not just a one solution type remedy that is required going forward. So these are some of the things that we have recognized, and we're already working with our various partners and also in government, out of government, to see how best we can craft the best approach going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to add one very important point, and that is in the process of mobilizing climate finance for the implementation of projects that help to mitigate and help us to adapt to climate change, the modality of how those projects are to be implemented and the obligations really affects us both in terms of time and cost. For example, the Green Climate Fund, for example, we have to have delivery partners. In the same way for the GRIF Fund, we have to have partner entities. So the finances don't actually come to us to implement. It goes through a process. It goes to a partner that is not necessarily locally based or buys into what the national development agenda is. And in that process, there's a lot of time being consumed and there's a lot of costs associated with implementing those projects. And so there's always this cry by the beneficiaries as to why we're moving so slow. So I think it is important to mention that that's a particular challenge in the based on your question, Mr. Kumar, with regards to what is affecting the implementation of climate change projects.